Imagine you were driving alone at night, and the highway kept looping you back to the same motel that became more wrong the more you look at it. Or what if you looked up at the sky and saw a green star that slowly convinced you that everyone and everything hated you until this drove you to insanity? Or what if a harmless thought, like a turtle or a fictional world on a DVD, turned out to be something much more sinister? Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Today we'll be looking at some cool SCP stories that fall under the realm of cosmic horror. The SCP Foundation is a fictional online organization where anyone can contribute their own short stories to expand the universe. This results in a ton of fantastic stories, ranging from stairs that lead to nowhere to cosmic deities. I will be spoiling all of the stories that I talk about as well as referencing some other material, so get ready and I hope you enjoy. SCP-6819 is an event that happens on highways within the United States. It involves the transportation of the vehicle into an alternate reality, followed by an eventual return to base reality. But in this other reality, a lot of strange events occur. The event only takes place at night, between 11 p.m. and 4 a.m. Also, the number of passengers has to be minimal, and they must be previously or currently employed by the SCP Foundation. Drivers first notice the absence of other vehicles, and then stuff like GPS and cellular service start to disappear as well. The environment looks just like a regular highway, but with all the features of a highway removed, such as road signs or any other structures. There is no natural light source, and any visibility beyond the headlights is very slight. The surrounding terrain is indistinct, though a rocky hill is consistently present to the right side of the road. At the top of this hill, an anomalous structure is visible. Descriptions of this structure vary between individuals. Some describe it as a prison or a fortress, a military installation, or a bunker embedded into the landscape. Despite these differences, all accounts agree on its scale and presence. It is massive and illuminated by powerful floodlights that contrast sharply against the surrounding darkness. The structure does not appear to move closer as the vehicle progresses, instead maintaining a fixed position relative to the driver, as though traveling alongside them. A defining aspect of SCP-6819 is the presence of an event that happens on the road. They are inconsistent in what happens, but one thing remains the same. They attempt to slow down the driver and have him exit the vehicle. One early recorded case involved the driver who found the carcass on the road. As she approached, she saw a creature feeding on it. The animal was described as bear-like, but with unnatural proportions, including elongated limbs resembling human arms. Despite the injuries, the prey remained alive, continuing to thrash and scream as it was being consumed. As the driver passed, the predator stopped feeding and stared directly at the vehicle, maintaining eye contact until it disappeared from view. In another instance, a driver reported observing a dark object moving alongside the road. It reflected no light and appeared as a three-dimensional void against the landscape. It moved at a constant mechanical speed, parallel to the vehicle. After being briefly lost from view, it later reappeared ahead of the car, crossing into the driver's path. The driver was forced to brake abruptly to avoid collision. When the vehicle came to a stop, the object was no longer present. A separate event involved a stretch of highway filled with stationary vehicles. From a distance, it appeared as a regular traffic jam. But upon closer inspection, all the vehicles were empty, with all the engines still running and the hazards on. Dozens of cars were packed together in a single lane, yet nobody was present in any of them. The driver passed the scene at high speed and took the next exit. In the final documented case, a driver found several humanoid figures standing on the road. They looked like humans, but their features were hidden by the masks they wore. Rather than attempt to pass them, the driver went towards the structure on the hill. As the vehicle approached, the floodlights of the building focused directly on it, illuminating an entrance to the structure. The driver described the building as both threatening and safe, noting a strong sense of comfort associated with the floodlights. However, before reaching the entrance, the driver lost consciousness. They were later recovered following a crash and did not survive. Across all recorded cases, one pattern remained consistent. The road presents obstacles and danger, with the only safe thing being the structure. I found the concept of this structure very interesting, and it reminded me of something I would come across in a Thomas Ligotti story. If you aren't familiar with him, his stories feature various buildings that operate on strange rules, like the Red Tower, which pumps out weird objects and even creatures, or bureaucratic establishments that turn out to be something much more sinister. Another interesting thing about this SCP is the employment thing, that it only targets those employed by the SCP Foundation, like it has a grudge against the workers because of all the work they do against these entities. SCP-7819 is a predatory location that takes the form of a roadside motel known as the Rest Easy Inn. And this one is actually a sequel to the last SCP, so there will be some similarities. It appears on highways in the United States, it must be between midnight and 4 a.m., and the victim must be previously or currently employed by the Foundation. As the driver approaches the structure, they begin to feel an overwhelming fatigue. This could be natural because they have already been driving for hours in the middle of the night, but the document leaves open the possibility that SCP-7819 itself is producing this exhaustion as a lure. If the driver tries to ignore the motel and keep going, they do not make it. Instead, their vehicle is somehow transported several miles backwards, forcing them to pass the same exit again, and this loop will continue until they finally pull into the parking lot. From there, this thing becomes something of an elaborate ritual. The Foundation survival guide walks the victim through each section: parking lot, lobby, elevator, hallways, room, pool, breakfast area, and finally checkout. Each space has its own rules, and breaking them can attract something's attention. The unsettling part is how mundane the setting is. A cheap roadside inn, filled with familiar details that are just wrong enough to suggest something is poorly imitating human life. The cars in the parking lot resemble real vehicles from a distance, but when you take a closer look, their logos are meaningless, and some of them are made from materials like plaster. One researcher compares this to a copy of a car, like someone heard a description of a minivan and tried to build one without ever seeing the original. This sets the tone for this SCP, a place attempting to look normal but failing in small physical ways that only humans can recognize as a poor imitation of the real thing. Once you get to the lobby, the front desk is empty, but there are sounds coming from behind the closed door. Wet slapping noises, coughing, moaning, and whispering. The instructions tell the victim not to speak, but to slam their fist against the door until they are given a room key. Because this place wants you to check in, although the process is broken and strangely hostile. Once you get to the elevator, you will be forced to encounter some creatures. One appears as an older, well-dressed man who politely tries to convince the victim to enter the elevator. The guide makes it clear that this guy should be avoided. Another appears as a woman in hiking gear who can be safely accompanied as long as the victim lies to her about everything, even small things. The third appears as a young vagrant who may silently offer a hug and a small trinket. These encounters don't seem outright scary, but due to the setting of this place, you can tell there is something wrong about each one of them. The hallways stretch far beyond what the exterior of the motel should allow, creating an impossible maze of carpets, stairways, and doors placed in physically impossible positions. It's like an amalgamation of every hotel ever, glued together without logic. SCP-7819 may be pulling from memories and cultural associations of hotels, and assembling them into something close to human architecture but fundamentally wrong to us. The room itself features 3 beds arranged around a microwave, as if that was the center of the room. Maybe the entity confused that with a TV. The bathroom is also fake, with plumbing and fixtures made out of materials like plywood. It's like this entity understands the symbols of comfort, but not the purpose behind them. Then comes the pool. Nearby, a radio plays a poor quality version of a song from the victim's childhood. However, the pool itself is covered by a thick membrane of water that cannot be broken, with shapes moving underneath it, including something person-shaped. Within the breakfast area, the food is of course fake and inedible. Plastic fruit, styrofoam waffles, and muddy water instead of coffee. But to be honest, I feel like this isn't that big of a stretch when I think back to some hotels I've stayed in. The only person present is an older man who asks the victim to stay. He does seem sincere and tries to make the stay better. He tries to convince the person that staying here might be easier than going back to the difficulties of life. The correct response is always the same. The victim must say they want to leave. The final survivor testimony says that this SCP is something that lives on the edges of highways, in those strange transitional places people pass through when they are tired and far from home. This one has all the elements I like in horror stories. Looping roads until you do what the event wants you to. Creepy mundane locations like motels with a sinister twist, and wacky characters that aren't inherently evil unless you take a wrong step. This one works so well because it turns the cheap roadside motel into a cosmic horror setting. Motels are already liminal spaces. They are built to imitate comfort without actually being a home. This SCP takes that artificial comfort and creates something horrific. A predator made from vacancy signs, carpeted hallways, fake breakfasts, hotel pools, and the feeling of driving too long at night. SCP-4548 is our next entry, and it is more of a classical depiction of cosmic horror, exploring a sinister mental invasion from a distant object. It is a green star that appears in the night sky, but only to those who have seen it already or became aware of it in some way. It is described as a mimetic cosmological phenomenon, meaning that it isn't just the fact that it exists, but your knowledge of it existing makes it a part of your reality. The Foundation suppresses information about this SCP and prevents large telescopes from observing it directly. This gives it this aura of something that has to be hidden from human attention. The people most vulnerable to this one are those who already experience some hardships or mental conditions. This makes this SCP especially cruel because it targets those who are already experiencing some difficulties. The primary effect begins when you look at the star with a naked eye. What happens is the affected person is unable to separate regular emotions from malice. For example, hearing something said to you in a neutral tone comes across as aggressive, and even mundane things like a chair or a table can feel like they were placed there specifically to hurt you. When I read this part, I thought of the scene from Evil Dead 2 where Ash goes a little crazy and starts laughing with the furniture around him. But of course that was a little more lighthearted than believing it hates you. The person begins to feel hatred from other people, objects, and eventually themselves. The world becomes emotionally unbearable and everything feels like it's there to be against them. There is an entry of an interview with a David Sato, which shows this progression clearly. He was already in a vulnerable place following his wife's death. After seeing the star, he starts to believe that the therapist and the Foundation is disgusted by him. He hears hostility in their voices even though they're just trying to help. He describes the star as hazy and sick looking, like something that felt wrong just to look at. And from that point on, it becomes all he can think about. He starts to believe that the guards will shoot him and that the furniture was placed there to spite him. The star becomes a constant presence, always visible through windows and eventually even walls. He says it is pounding a hole in his head, which paints a picture of something distant but also grossly intimate. Eventually, human voices become impossible for him to tolerate, so the Foundation starts to use computerized speech to talk to him. But of course, he eventually starts to believe that even the computerized voice hates him. He starts to talk about himself in third person, like David sees it, and it hates David. Then by the final interview, he thinks that he's not there anymore. Something else is speaking from where he used to be. It describes David as a hated thing that tried to escape his own body by tearing at himself, only to disappear into the green place. The final passage says that it may not be the star, but something else behind it. Some sort of intelligence that uses the star to convey these messages. The entity claims it has been up here forever and it is never going away. The green star has to barely do anything, it just hangs out above the world, and by doing so it teaches the victim to see hatred everywhere. And by the final phase, the presence of the star is everywhere, in the windows, the walls, the room, and even inside the victim. This one is frightening because it takes grief and anxiety and gives them a cosmic source. It turns a private feeling of anxiety, the fear that everyone secretly hates you, into an astronomical phenomenon. Somewhere above Earth, there is a green star that places hatred into human minds. And once someone truly sees it, they may never again be able to believe that anything in the universe is harmless. SCP-2614 is a scratched DVD copy of the 5th season of The Sopranos. At first, this sounds silly and harmless, especially compared to the other SCPs we covered so far. But the anomaly activates during a specific scene when a character inside the show is watching a film. If the viewer presses play on a remote at that moment, they gain control of the camera itself, like entering a free-roam camera mode inside the world of The Sopranos. From there, characters keep living after scenes would normally cut away. Tony Soprano goes to sleep, wakes up, gets mad over orange juice, and has private moments that were never part of the broadcast. The DVD is no longer showing a fictional edit of events, it becomes a window into a full functioning world. A television episode is a curated slice of reality. The camera points where the story wants us to look, and everything outside the frame is assumed not to matter. But this SCP suggests the opposite. Outside the frame, there are streets, strangers, and private lives that continue whether the audience is watching or not. It made me think that what if every piece of fiction ever created wasn't just the face value thing, the curated events, but an entire universe under those rules that continues to exist infinitely. Maybe even this universe was once a story being told and simply continued to run. The anomaly becomes even stranger once researchers discover that the camera can leave the original setting. The world of The Sopranos contains actual cities filled with people, However, the real horror begins when the camera enters other screens. If the point of view is moved into a television or computer screen inside this fictional world, it can pass into whatever media is playing on there. A movie playing inside The Sopranos becomes a new universe to enter. A show within that universe can contain another show, and that show can contain a movie. This SCP is a doorway into a potentially endless chain of fictional worlds nested inside one another, infinitely existing. Researchers managed to enter The Wizard of Oz, Snow White, The Simpsons, Goodfellas, A Space Odyssey, commercials, music videos, and even fictional media that exists only inside other fictional universes. Each world behaves according to its own internal rules, but those rules can extend far beyond the actual story we know. In Snow White, researchers find an entire continent beyond the events of the film. In 2001: A Space Odyssey, they discover a second monolith connected to an Atlantis-like civilization. One of the creepiest examples is a laundry detergent commercial. Because the commercial is only 24 seconds long, researchers observe a wall of white space advancing through the setting. The city inside the commercial becomes increasingly violent and chaotic as this boundary approaches. That detail is disturbing because it suggests that short-form media may create worlds with built-in expiration dates. The people inside may only exist for a few seconds, living in a collapsing artificial reality designed to sell a product. While the Sopranos universe was functioning and made sense, it's because it's a full show. This is a short commercial, so the world isn't fleshed out, and it causes it to collapse. This SCP is one of the most fascinating ideas I've ever heard. Something extremely specific and ordinary, a DVD of The Sopranos that turns into a massive idea. Every piece of media may be more than a recording. It could be a window into a complete reality with its own geography, history, people, and hidden corners. And if you keep moving through those windows, you may eventually reach places that were never created for an audience at all. Our next story comes from a subsection of the SCP Foundation, Wilson's Wildlife Solutions, where there are entries of various creatures or critters. The one we will be taking a look at today is a sea turtle named Chel. Chel appears at first to be a regular sea turtle kept in Marine Enclosure 3. Her profile describes her as a staff favorite, unusually affectionate, and just great all around. It is able to calm people just by being near them. The tone of the passage is almost childish in how warmly it talks about this creature. But the tone changes when you look at it a bit closer. Chel doesn't eat. It refuses all food but maintains a healthy weight. Even more concerning, nobody at the enclosure can remember when she arrived. When one of the workers looks at Chel's record, there is a gap in the history. Instead of giving a normal origin, the writing becomes uncertain and fragmented, and the worker's own memory is being interfered with while she writes. She tries to cover the gaps with jokes, imagining Chel may have had some adventurous backstory. The key figure in this case is Chel's primary caretaker. He is described as somebody who's always wanted to work with turtles, which becomes important once his diary is discovered. According to his notes, Chel didn't exist at first. She was something he imagined. He had always wished there was a turtle like Chel at the facility, a deeply affectionate creature that everybody loved. He even had drawings of her before she existed. And then one day she just appeared. Not only that, but everyone seamlessly accepted her existence as if she had always been there. This reminded me of a concept known as telergy that I first saw in the movie Visitors from the Arcana Galaxy, where an author is able to literally manifest the characters from the novel. So Chel seems to be an idea that forced itself into reality, then rewrote people's memories to make room for itself. The people around her do not immediately question her because their minds are adjusted around her presence. The staff become fond of her. Even the person looking into all of this keeps slipping back into affectionate language, worrying about Chel as if she's an innocent, frightened animal. Maybe this is some protective skill or trait that Chel developed, since she is clearly supernatural. The most unsettling part comes during the incident at the main caretaker's apartment. After he stops coming to work, the others check on him. They find him inside, shaking and whispering. Most of what he says is completely incoherent, but they are able to decipher one phrase. It screams for me. It wants to stay. It's screaming to stay. I don't want to follow its pattern. Chel works great as cosmic horror because it's not a monster attacking people directly. It is the idea that imagination itself can become dangerous, much like the Sopranos thing I talked about earlier. It is the idea that a passing thought or a daydream can turn into something real if the right person imagines it and spends enough time thinking about it. But of course, this comes at a cost. SCP-7179 paints a picture of an eerie afterlife that initially seems like heaven, but the longer you stay there, the more it starts to resemble hell. After death, an individual's consciousness is transported into this separate environment. These environments are uniform, each consisting of a vast ocean and a small tropical island. The climate remains comfortable to the individual's preference, and the sun is always shining, resulting in uninterrupted daylight. There are no storms or any environmental threats, and the ocean is always still, with no tides or winds. A perfect tropical experience. Any attempts to leave this place are unsuccessful. Anyone who tries to leave by swimming will eventually return to the same island in a loop. There are plants and animals, as well as a small wooden house. Inside the house are 3 human figures, up to the preference of the individual. They look just like regular humans, but they have no personality or feelings. They're kind of like robots. Physical harm in this place is possible, but death is not. If you hurt yourself really bad, it will just take a really long time to get back to full health. This place sounds pretty ideal, but every individual that finds themselves here discovers that after a short time, there isn't really much to do. Definitely not for all eternity. SCP's Department of Tactical Theology followed the story of one individual that found themselves here and has a log of it. He started out by eating all the food and interacting with the 3 individuals he picked out, but the lack of variation led to a very boring existence. The individual tried everything, including agriculture and building stuff out of wood, trying to find some purpose. But any purpose he found couldn't last forever. After 11,902 years, he was really bored and he started to attack the 3 advanced robots that he picked out for himself. He killed them, but as you can't die here, 8,000 years after, they fully reassembled. And by this point, he was completely numb to violence. After 124,000 years, he built an elaborate structure out of stone that killed him. 800,000 years after that, he was fully reassembled, but he just kept doing the same thing, killing himself in different kinds of elaborate ways. This part kind of reminded me of Hellraiser and how in that universe people get bored of all sorts of pleasure, so they turn to extra-dimensional pain in order to experience new things. Although when comparing these two, it makes it seem silly that in Hellraiser people get bored of earthly stimuli within a lifetime, whereas in this SCP, it took the subject thousands of years to get bored. There comes a point at 5 times 10 to the 28th factorial years when all possible scenarios have been reached. He has built every structure, ate every food, killed himself in every possible way, and there was literally nothing new for him to experience. And the final entry for the subject is at 10 to the 100th factorial years, and it reads that 1 second of eternity has passed. Quite a scary story. A tropical beach island for eternity sounds like heaven at first, but in only 1 short second of eternity, there is nothing left to do there. Another similar story to this is A Short Stay in Hell from my most recent Hell video, where individuals are placed in an infinite library for an infinite amount of time. However, I do think that one is the better scenario, since there are others there to converse with, and there is an infinite land to explore.